I don't
Good
know if it's
evening.
gonna. I
Good
don't know if it's
evening,
gonna.
everyone, and welcome to our town hall with current Auditor General but congressional candidate Eugene DePasquale, who is running for Congress in the 10th Congressional District. Just want to remind everyone, please join the discussion. You can write your questions for our candidate in the comment box, and he will answer them. How are you today?
Hey, doing great, Madam Chair. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Exactly 2 weeks from today is
That's
Election
right.
Day.
That's right. We are. The excitement is clearly starting to build. There's no doubt about it.
And you said you voted today yourself?
Yeah, I actually voted. York County has the drop box right outside the county administrative center. There was at least 8 or 9 people that voted right around the same time as me. It was super easy. Just went up, dropped it in. They had, and someone from the elections department was right there. They even, asked you, did you put it in the secrecy envelope and check the signature? Not so much for the accuracy, but making sure you dated it right. So, at least in York, and I heard that's happening. At least from PA 10 and Dauphin and Cumberland as well, trying to make sure people have submitted everything properly.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of calls about that. But first, tell everyone what makes up the 10th Congressional District.
So the 10th congressional district is all of Dauphin County, and then it is portions of York and Cumberland. So the York portion, you think York City, just south of the city, Spring Garden Township, parts of York Township, parts of Spring and Sperry make up the district, and then sort of take it up north along sort of the 83 corridor, even the 74 corridor. And then you have Cumberland County over to about Carlisle, a little bit extra.
Okay, great. Going back to what you were saying about the ballots, I'm receiving a lot of calls. In Dauphin County, as you know, every county is different.
Yeah.
We do not have a drop box. We did for the primary, we do not for the general. So people have to actually walk their ballot into our Dauphin County Administration building and hand it into the office. Now, Dauphin County did extend their hours during the week to 8 p.m. and they're open on Saturdays. But what people are concerned about is they have to go through security to vote.
Oh, yeah, you
And
did not have to do that in York. They had the box right outside. Now they
right,
had a sheriff deputy there, but they were just there in a sense to make sure nobody does anything. They weren't hovering over the box. The person right at the box was somebody staff from the elections office.
so there's really nothing that could be done about that on a state or federal level, correct? That's up to the county commissioners.
Each county has the ability to do that. They can have as many or as few boxes as they want. Look, for Dauphin, you wish it were outside. I mean, that's my preference. But having
Right.
said that, they at least have extended the hours and the Saturday hours, so that's at least a good sign.
Yes. Yes. So tell us, you have been in public life for a long time. What makes you want to run for Congress?
I just thought with all the issues facing our country, when I made this decision, and my background as Auditor General, and even my background as a state legislator, that I think Washington, D.C. could use someone with my style of leadership, someone that's been a tough and fair watchdog on a Republican governor and tough and fair watchdog on a Democratic governor, someone that's rooted out waste, but also found ways to make the government work better. And also with my personal story, I mean, people have started to get to know that during the campaign.
Right.
Losing a brother to muscular dystrophy, knowing what it's like for families to have someone that can't get insurance because of a pre-existing condition. My father, who was wounded in Vietnam, actually won 2 Purple Hearts, but then which eventually led to addiction to pain medicine and incarceration. Now he's out now and doing fine, but those backgrounds help also shape me so that I know that there's a lot of people out there that are struggling, and I'm going to be their voice.
We have a question here from Anju. I'll let you respond to it. She would like to know, is it too late for people to mail in now? Maybe you can explain to everyone the Supreme Court decision that came out.
Yeah, the short answer is no. Now, again, people can either choose to take it and drop it off, or they can put it in the mail. Now, what the United States, first of all, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court had a decision that up until, as long as you mail it by election day, if it's received up until the Friday after election day, it will
Mhm.
still be counted. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a sense, upheld that decision yesterday by a 4-4 vote. So that is now the law. If you mail it by election day and it gets there by the Friday after, it will still be counted. I'm here to tell you, do not wait that long. what's today? Today is the 20th. I think if you
Yes.
mail it anytime between now and I would say early next week, I think you're fine. I would say that by the time you get to Tuesday next week, personally, I would then be taking it down to the either doing one of two things: either not doing anything, marking it up at all, and taking it to your precinct and handing it and having them spoil it, and then you vote there, or bring it to the county elections department. But to me, in my own mind, by Monday or Tuesday next week, that's when you start getting to the point where I would be more wanting to vote in person at my precinct or take it to the drop box.
Another option too people have, as I'm sure you know, is you can actually go in Dauphin County to the Dauphin County Elections Bureau, which is 2 South 2nd Street in the city of Harrisburg. If you didn't apply for an application yet, they'll give it to you there. You can fill it out, turn it in. They'll actually give you your ballot right there, and you can fill it out and turn it in as well. I know
Yep.
some individuals have done that. That's our version of early voting in a
Yeah.
way.
So yeah, right now our version of early voting is you got your absentee or vote by mail in the mail. You can drop it off, or you're right. Someone that is newly registered can literally go down, or not even newly registered. You can just go down there, apply for the ballot. They give it to
Right.
you, and then you just literally fill it out and drop it right then.
So there's a lot going on with the coronavirus, as you
Yep.
know. And it was reported today in the news that Pennsylvania is reporting some of the highest positive test rates since the summer. So, if elected, you would you support another shutdown or mandatory wearing of masks or anything of that nature?
Well, the first thing we've got to do is work to get a vaccine for this virus. That's the number one thing we have to do. And I think it's going to be almost impossible to have anything like a shutdown again. Obviously, there's going to be appropriate safeguards in place. While again, I haven't supported a mask mandate at the national level, I do think the state and local level, it's appropriate for, depending on what the health data is in those counties, to have a mask mandate depending on what's happening on the ground at the local level. So, and even if that mandate doesn't come, everyone should wear a mask and should be 6 feet apart. I do think that, again, some businesses are not going to be able to be open, and some individuals will be unemployed through no fault of their own. And I
Right.
do think the federal government has to step in and help them until we can get back to some semblance of normal. But the most critical thing is to get a vaccine and for everyone to wear a mask, continue to wash their hands, and still be socially distant or physically distant from people until we can get beyond this.
As you know, the president is pushing for a vaccine, well, within the next 2 weeks, basically, before the election. Would you trust a vaccine that early? And the only reason why I say that,
Yeah.
as you know, it usually takes 3, 4 plus years
Yeah.
to come up with a vaccine. And even then, sometimes they still have to tweak it to
Yeah.
get it perfect.
Look, I'm going to rely on health experts and science experts on the virus vaccine and when that is ready to go out to the general population, not from any politician. And that would be Democrat or Republican. We should be listening to the health experts on this, and this should be removed from the politics. Look, I want it to happen tomorrow, but need to
Right.
make sure that it's safe and scientifically sound before we start injecting with people without knowing all the ramifications. There has to be appropriate testing and protocols in place before something goes out to the general population.
I'm sure also you've been following that Speaker Pelosi put a deadline
Yeah.
on the president and Republicans as far as negotiating a stimulus package for those Americans who are struggling and small businesses. What's your take on that? Do you think that's something that the Speaker should be doing, or should the Democrats just be accepting whatever the president's about to give? If you were in Congress, what would you do?
To me, you never stop negotiating. I mean, to me, your job as a member of Congress, U.S. Senate or U.S. House, or as a president, you work all the way through your term. And if that means you get a deal the day before the election, tomorrow, or anywhere in between, you get the deal done because people need the help. So, look, I understand sometimes negotiating tactics. I don't know everything that's happening behind closed doors, but in my
Right,
mind, you never stop negotiating until you get the deal because the public needs the help.
right. We have another question here on voting. An immigrant can vote if they become citizens at least 30 days ago. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. Um, I don't want to sit here and say definite one way or the other, but I believe that's correct. we can probably do the research and get that individual the exact answer on that.
Right. What we do know, though, is that yesterday was the last day to register the vote
Yeah.
to
So if
be
you're
able
not
to
registered
vote.
right now, it's too late anyway. But
Yes.
if that person is registered and they filled out all the appropriate paperwork prior to then and they're registered, yeah, they can vote. But if they're not registered now anyway, I hate to say it, it's too late.
Yes. Now let's get into a little bit of policy. As you know, I'm a policy wonk. So, what are your top 2 to 3 issues of what you're running on?
Well, certainly, since COVID has happened, the number one issue has got to be helping people that are struggling, businesses, individuals, getting a vaccine done and getting this economy back up and running is the number one priority. Certainly, then beyond that, it's really, I would say, 4 issues. One is certainly healthcare, building upon the Affordable Care Act. Scott Perry has voted 12 times to take away protections with people with pre-existing conditions. I talked about my brother and muscular dystrophy and us never able to have health insurance for him. So I want to build upon the Affordable Care Act, give people a true public option. If you want to buy into Medicare, get to buy into Medicare. If you can't afford that or your own private insurance, automatically enroll you into Medicaid. That's certainly one. Lowering the cost of prescription drugs, allowing the federal government to negotiate for lower pricing. Certainly we have to do police reform and treat climate change like the moral crisis that it is.
What is the first piece of legislation you would like to author if elected?
I've said all along that the first bill I will introduce will be a bill to eliminate the backlog of untested rape kits across the country. Certainly, that was something my investigation found over 3,200 untested rape kits in Pennsylvania. Through my leadership, we reduced that backlog by 97%. I'd like to see that same type of action across the country. Other states have done that as well, but not every state. I'd love to see more action across the country.
As you know, campaigning has changed because of COVID. There's a lot that candidates have not been able to do until recently.
Right.
So how have you been getting your message out to the voters? As you know, at least here in Dauphin County, you're the only Democratic candidate that was able to get any type of debate with your opponent.
Right.
So how are you letting people know what Scott Perry's record is, since he's not obviously telling people?
So obviously people have probably seen the boatload of televisions we've been running since mid-August. We started out telling my personal story, a little bit about my life background, what I'm kind of like. Now you see there's an ad with me hiking with the kids, talking about the challenges and what it's like overcoming those challenges. While at the same time, we've had an ad with a couple veterans that started today talking about why they support me. And some outside groups have been talking about Scott Perry's horrible record on healthcare and prescription drug costs. So that's working as sort of as a 1-2 punch that's happening right now on the airwaves. Meanwhile, we had 2 debates that even the debate last night, I'm surprised that when I was at the ballot, when I went to vote about, I guess it's 6:19 now or 6:20, I voted at about 3:30. There was at least 8 or 10 people just walking through downtown York that said they saw the debate. So maybe it had higher viewership than even I thought, but it seemed like a lot of people watched it. Again, I don't know what the ratings were. It certainly wasn't going to be the 80 million of a presidential debate, but clearly our 2 debates had some viewership. So, the ads that are running are certainly outlining my record. Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and the House Majority PAC are running ads talking about certainly Congressman Perry's record, outlining some of its weaknesses as well. So that's the airwaves. And we're doing the best we can. We're also, probably a lot of people in here have gotten mailers from us. Mailers. I don't know how many of you've gotten, but we've done at least 8 of them. I've lost track. We're also doing a calling and texting program to persuadable voters, as well as what you would consider being the Democratic base vote. Plus, we've had since Labor Day about 100 different Zoom events. So we're doing our best. It's not the same as when I ran for the State House and knocking on doors, but we at the same time have to be smart about how we campaign as well.
Right. There's actually an article out today in the Patriot News that I'm part of, where they're talking about how important the Black vote is going to be in the elections this year. And as you know, the 10th district is very diverse.
Yep.
So I want to ask you, removing criminal justice reform, because everyone agrees, even the president will say we need some reforms with that.
Yeah.
But when we bring up COVID, we see the disparities in healthcare in the Black communities. Now with education, we see the digital divide depending on where you live.
Right.
that's before we get to the economic ramifications, the wage disparities, the employment disparities. I mean, the list goes on and on. What are some policies that you support for communities of colors outside of criminal justice reform that can help these communities not just get past this crisis, but in general?
A couple of things. First of all, education, making a commitment that I fight for as much education funding, particularly special education, which is really where the federal government has the most budgetary impact, to make sure our school districts, particularly Harrisburg, York, and Carlisle, get the special education funding they need, so that students that have special needs can get the help, because I know that impacts a lot of students in those three districts. That's number one. Certainly number two, I've been visiting small businesses throughout the district. A lot of minority-owned businesses weren't able to get the COVID help that they should have gotten because they maybe didn't have the right lobbyist or the right lawyer. They didn't know the right buzzwords. So that's something, again, I would work to address, to make sure that if I'm a member of Congress, there's a COVID relief package. Certainly when it comes to housing, making sure that we have more affordable, quality housing in the 10th Congressional District for people of color, and anyone, but particularly people of color. Having reforming financial services laws to make it illegal for redlining, for home mortgage loans, to make it easier for people of color to be able to get a loan so they can buy a home. And also when it comes to contracting with the federal government, better training for minority and women-owned businesses so they can get their proper federal certification, so that they can get federal contracts, so we fairly compete for federal contracts. You've got that federal courthouse in downtown Harrisburg, perhaps the largest federal project in a generation. Not one minority contractor was able to get a bid there. That's unacceptable, and that's something that I would certainly fight to change if I'm a member of Congress.
But what about that access to opportunity? Your opponent won't even admit that racism even exists.
Yeah,
so when you have a group of people, well, I'm going to argue, when you have a whole political party on the Republican side where the majority are not even accepting or acknowledging there's a problem, as a congressman, as you know, you're one of many, even if the Democrats keep that control. What can you do to address a lot of the problems you mentioned?
I think there's two things here. One is there's Republican elected officials, then there's Republican voters. There's a lot of moderate Republicans in this district that recognize systemic racism as real. Also, climate change. 63% of voters in this district believe climate change is a pressing problem. So that lets you know that it's not just Democrats in the district. About 70% of the voters in this district recognizing that some form of racism is a problem. Again, that means it's well beyond political parties. So to me, I always try to separate Republican elected officials from actual registered Republicans, let people know that there is certainly room for opening on a discussion with a lot of registered Republicans that live in this district. And I think you've got to be a leader. Look, Scott Perry missed a moment. He said systemic racism isn't real, and the death of George Floyd and others was, again, his word, sensationalized. It's clearly unacceptable and not working to try to bring our community together. Look, we can have different views of what it's necessary to get police reform done so we can eliminate some of these horrible acts that have happened to people of color by some in law enforcement. But you have to recognize, and Scott Perry won't, that we have a problem there. So when I say Black Lives Matter, I have to give a hat tip to, or golf clap, whatever it is, to my son. When we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago and Scott Perry made those statements, he said, he goes, Dad, when you see a bumper sticker and it says Save the Bay, that's somebody that's recognizing that there's pollution in the Chesapeake Bay, there's a problem, and they want to fix it. He goes, nobody thinks when they see that bumper sticker, that person's anti-Pacific Ocean. So when we say Black Lives Matter, we're not saying you're anti anybody else. It's recognizing we have a problem in communities of color at the hands of law enforcement, and we need to fix it. So if you're going to say all lives matter, to make sure all lives matter, we have to also say Black Lives Matter.
Right. And one thing that the protests continue to do and have done in the past as well is bring awareness to the issues. But what I admired about the protests in the 1960s is Martin Luther King and others weren't just marching in the streets. They were also in the White House making sure that legislation got passed. So while I agree that, we have to separate the electorate from the elected officials, it's those of you who are elected that have the power to make that change.
That's why I'm running to beat Scott Perry.
Yes, we got to make sure we elect people who have those views. to work on those disparities that happen. So schools, you brought up, you have children. Yep. Does your son go to Pitt? Am I
No, he
correct with
goes
that?
to Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. He is a
Okay.
junior there, and my
Okay.
daughter is a senior in high school. And without, Temple's our number one choice right now, but still a couple other options out there. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Well, as you know, there's a lot of controversy with the schools opening right now. In Dauphin County, some have opened, some haven't, some are hybrid. Um, there's been no leadership on the federal level on this, basically,
Right.
which is why everyone's doing their own thing. If you are elected to Congress, is there a role that you see the federal government can play in assisting schools to open safely and keep everyone safe?
First of all, I certainly wouldn't do what Scott Perry said, which was before the schools open. He said students cannot pass the virus upon to teachers and other
Right.
staff in the school. Now, he quote said, generally speaking, it can't happen, but still, he was since trying to, for political reasons, push these schools to open. And now what we've seen is there's been outbreaks in schools, and some have had to close. And go all virtual because of this, which furthers the education divide. Because low income students, regardless of their race, don't always have the same exposure to high speed Wi-Fi, which certainly impacts the education divide even further that
Right.
already exists in Pennsylvania. Number one, you need to be providing, as a member of Congress, actual factual data related to science health. That's number one. Number two is I do believe the federal government should be coming up with nationwide standards, not mandates, but standards on how to have safe in-person instruction on what are best practices, looking at what's working and what's not working in other parts of the country, and making sure, in cooperation with states and local school districts, how we can make sure for kids that need to learn virtually, how they can get access to high-speed internet.
Um, we have a question for you here. I'll put it up for you. If you get elected, how can local citizens support your efforts to get financial support for families affected by COVID-19 and the ACA Act?
Well, certainly when it comes to healthcare, well, obviously there's going to be a Supreme Court decision sometime
Right.
in December that will have tremendous impact potentially on the Affordable Care Act. So we're going to have to wait and see how that goes, whether we're going to be able to build upon it or have to start from scratch, depending on what the Supreme Court does. And certainly, I think when it comes to helping families in PA10, working with school districts, working with the United Way, other regional charities, the food bank, to continue to promote those efforts for a lot of these entities that are doing their part to help people that need the help in PA10. And I certainly would be doing my part to make sure that those entities get the proper exposure.
Regarding, and even if you were in Congress right now, obviously the current Supreme Court vacancy doesn't affect the House. But do you have any opinions on that as far as, do the voters have a right to have a say in who fills that seat? With the decision in Pennsylvania with the ballots, it was split evenly.
Yeah.
I actually think it's amazing that Justice Roberts seems to be that swing vote. Who would have thought that? But I think we can see how important this seat is going to be.
Yeah, there's no question. First of all, I don't understand why they just can't wait a couple weeks. That I don't understand, especially when they're literally not able to get the next COVID relief package done because they're so focused on the Supreme Court
Right.
Supreme Court vacancy. We've seen it through the history that usually it takes about 60 days. They're trying to jam this through in about 40 days when it simply could just wait a couple of weeks. I think the priority should be now a COVID relief package, and then they can handle right after the election the Supreme Court situation.
Right. I guess we just have to hope she's going to be more independent, because it's obvious they're trying to put her on to get rid of the ACA Act.
Yeah, look.
At least that's my perception.
That it is hard for me to believe anything other than that you are 100% right. We don't know. Look, we all know that Supreme Court justices, some once they've been on, have evolved.
Right.
But she's been pretty clear on a lot of these positions in her writings. Her opinions may change. I'm not a mind reader. You're not a mind reader. But it certainly seems like pretty clear that she's being picked because she will overturn the ACA. Again, I don't know her personally, never met her, but I've read some of these, at least portions of her opinion. But her views on this seem pretty clear.
And, one of Trump's legacy, in addition to his, I don't know what you want to call it, but his legacy is going to be the courts.
Yeah.
And she's 48 years old herself. So he is definitely putting people on the courts that, depending on the rulings, could definitely change a generation or two.
Republican presidents tend to be more focused on the courts than Democratic presidents.
Yes.
And
yes.
I don't understand all of the rationale for that. And look, you and I have never been president, but
right.
They tend to be more focused on that.
Sometimes I think we focus too much about the courts only when we're in front of one, when we need to think about it beforehand. But we have a court question here. Steve would like to know if you support packing the court.
Look, I think we need to be more focused on how getting this situation delayed as much as possible and focusing in on coronavirus relief. I am concerned about the current makeup of the court. One of the areas where again, I get concerned about attempts to just prejudge something and say you're going to pack the court. I tend to get concerned with that. Having said that,
right.
I do know that there are a lot of areas in the country where it has been regarded. Both parties have said that we do need more federal district judges because some of these courts are overwhelmed. So I'm more open at this stage to saying we may need some more federal district court judges based on the workload and population shifts across the country.
And one other thing about President Trump is he's appointed all these judges, but it's my understanding, none of them are any judges of color. He hasn't diversified the court whatsoever. And representation, obviously, as a Black woman, to me, representation matters. You need those different opinions,
absolutely,
those different view sets to be able to enact the best policies. So my question to you, and I've asked you this many times before, and I know obviously your focus right now is just getting elected, but do you plan on having a diverse staff, a staff that looks like your district? Because as you know, a lot of, and I'm not putting you in this category, but we see this in Congress all the time. A lot of people take their campaign staff with them when there's so much talent out there that they could bring in their office with them.
Yeah, it is my commitment. Look, I'm sure, first of all, I've got to win. I'm sure there'll be some people from the campaign that'll join the team and others that won't. And we'll be certainly reaching out to other areas of the community as well. But my district office and the DC office will be diverse. And I will do everything I can, particularly in DC, where maybe, I don't know how exactly it'll shake down, but the district office will certainly reflect the district. And just like when I was a state house member, it will also be bilingual as well. So we will make sure that we have representation for people that are Spanish speaking as well, because that is, a portion of the district as well. And even when I was in the state house, I had 3 staffers. It was diverse, 1 Hispanic, 1 African American, 1 person that was Caucasian, but they were all women. So, we will see how the exact numbers shake out when I am hopefully a member of Congress, but it will definitely be a diverse team that will reflect the district.
And you've always been very accessible. Do you plan on to stay accessible to your constituents?
Absolutely. I'm going to do the best I can personally. I know that it'll be a little bit tougher as a member of Congress, just like it was kind of tougher as a statewide elected official to respond to every phone call myself. But the short answer is yes. I will remain accessible. Certainly during COVID, we'll have to be smart about this. But I plan on having 4 in-person town hall meetings each year. Now, again, if it's still COVID, we may have to do some of that over a Zoom, because I do want people to be able to see my face and make sure they can look at me as much as possible, eyeball to eyeball. And certainly I will do the best I can to remain accessible. But my team will be committed to returning phone calls, returning emails, even if it isn't me personally.
And the reason why I bring that up, and I'm sure you've heard this as you talk to voters, now, Congress is a little bit different, since technically as soon as you win, you have to start running again.
Right.
But a lot of times you only see politicians around election time and not in between when there's issues. And Scott Perry is one of those. He does not respond to constituent requests, regardless of your political party. And I think it's important to know that if elected, you won't be like him in that sense.
No, my political opponents usually attack me for being too accessible. Remember, they one time said I had too many press conferences. I was like, that's one of the, other than making fun of my last name, perhaps one of the dumbest attacks I've ever heard. But
I don't know what this is with the names this
it,
year.
it's just weird. It's just
Yes,
weird. We're all different. We're a melting pot. It's what makes us. To me, it's what adds strength to our country. Our diversity makes us stronger. Why
right.
we're making forget like look, I got it is what it is. I'm in the arena, but to me, it's just cheap gutter politics.
It is, and sometimes you just have to laugh.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It shows the desperation,
Absolutely.
really. So, what committees would you like to serve on, and why?
Well, so I've said that armed services and education and labor would be two of my top choices. I think because impact of the district, there's a lot of defense and a lot of veterans in the district. I've a lot of a lot of defense contractors, so that's certainly an element of the district. Obviously, education and the workforce are huge aspects of the district as well. So those would be two top priorities. Certainly, veterans affairs. Transportation and small business would also be at the top of the list as well.
Will you be an independent thinker if
Yeah,
elected to Congress?
I'm wired that way. It's what
Okay.
made me so effective as an auditor general. Look, Governor Corbett, former Republican Governor Tom Corbett, said when he was governor and I was the auditor general, he knew I always played it straight, never played it politically. Sometimes that meant you had to say, hey, he was doing it right. Sometimes I was critical. Same thing with Governor Wolf. Look, I'm a Democrat, voted for Governor Wolf, but we don't. Sometimes I'm just like with his recent business waiver audit that I conducted. Sometimes I have to be critical because that's the job. I'll do the same thing in Washington. I'm going to look out for the district, not a far right wing ideology like Scott Perry does as a member of the Freedom Caucus, where he literally helped to lead the shutdown of the federal government and said, I don't know a single federal worker that lives paycheck to paycheck. When he voted to overturn the Affordable Care Act, he said, I'm tired of paying for women's health care. I've already had my kids. That we've got to make a
Right.
change there.
I have a question here about the economy. Pennsylvania doesn't have a lot of huge industries outside of government and healthcare. We have some of the best schools in the country, but we lose a lot of our young talents because of not having a lot of industries. And obviously, COVID did not help that situation. Do you have any ideas on how to bring industries, larger companies into Pennsylvania, or even help start up some small businesses to keep the young talent that we have in the state instead of them moving to other states where there's better opportunities and better
Yeah.
paying jobs?
I think the best way to tackle this is to do two things at the same time, and that is tackle climate change and grow our economy at the same time by investing in blue collar and green energy jobs. I think if we can do that, we can get a lot of larger manufacturers here and at the same time create those good paying jobs. And I think we've got to do a better job. You take like Dauphin County Technical School and New York County School of Technology. I think we have to expand similar type of opportunities here for people that those schools have almost 100% job placement, but they're capped depending on what school district you're living in. We have to find ways to expand opportunities there. I think if we do those two things, we'll be able to find a way to keep our young talent here.
So tell everyone, how can they get involved with your campaign?
A couple of things. First of all, you can go to eugeneforcongress.com, EUGENEFOR Congress.com. You can sign up to get a yard sign, to volunteer, and so that's the best way to go about it. We have volunteer forms, and we also have a Facebook campaign website and a
Mm-hmm.
Twitter. The campaign one is Eugene A. DePasquale on Facebook. On Twitter, it's at DePasqualePA. You can follow me there, or you can communicate to the campaign through the Facebook page. But the best way is to go to the website, send something, or you can email the campaign at info@eugeneforcongress.com. Every day we're texting, every day we're calling, we're doing some no contact lit drops. And if someone wants to even have a house party, virtual, of course,
Right.
that's something that can be done as well. Though the time's getting a little short on those.
Right. And just so everyone knows, I do have a Eugene's email address, not email, I'm sorry, website scrolling at the bottom if you need to know exactly how to spell that.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming if they wanted to donate to your campaign, they would do that through the website as well.
You can absolutely donate through the campaign, and believe me, it's the first thing that pops up when you go to the website. Hey, donate
I'm
here.
sure.
They don't miss a trick when it comes to trying to get as much money in to pay for these television commercials.
And, just a quick question on money in politics. I had an interview with the newspaper today about that so much money is being dumped into this part of the state.
Yeah.
Not just in your race, but some of our state Senate and
Right.
House seats as well. How do we get some of this money, at least when we phrase that, how do we get some of this dark money out of these elections?
As much as I'm not a big fan of it, at least the individual campaigns have to post to everyone that's given them money.
Yes.
So at least, look, is there too much money in it? The answer is yes. But at least anyone that's donated, myself, and I have to say that even Scott Perry, or any of our state House, state Senate candidates, we have to post who gives to us. These dark money super PACs is where the problem is, because people are able to give money to these groups and they don't have to disclose their donors. I believe that that's where, Citizens United, I think it should be overturned. I'd like to see a lot of these super PACs go away. But even if Citizens United isn't overturned, Congress and the House and Senate can certainly pass a law requiring donor disclosure. That, to me, would be an important first step.
Yes, and that's why I changed my question to be more specific.
Yeah.
Money, because as you know, as you mentioned, that's not reported.
Right.
We have a little joke here. Can we get the spelling of your name from Scott Perry's ad too?
Oh yeah, look, I would say it's DE, no space, capital P, ASQUALE. And for those that didn't hear the first time, capital D, small e, no space, capital P, ASQUALE. But if you already got your ballot, you don't spell it. Just fill in the circle.
And speaking of the ballot, I just want to remind everyone that Pennsylvania no longer has straight party voting. So please make sure you vote for each individual office so we don't lose the drop off with our lower offices.
That's exactly right.
We're almost at the end now, but you've already sort of compared yourself to your opponent. But is there anything specific that you would like people to know how you differ from the current that office right now?
Look, he represents a far-right ideology. I want to represent a district. He's voted 12 times to take away protections for pre-existing conditions. I'll fight to keep them and build upon the Affordable Care Act so everyone has access to quality, affordable health care. He's voted against lowering the cost of prescription drugs. I will fight to make sure the federal government has the ability to negotiate for lower prices. He's a climate denier. I believe climate change is a moral crisis and needs to be addressed. And he has said systemic racism is real. I recognize it's a real problem, and I'm going to work to get it fixed. Those are just some of the differences between Scott Perry and I. He is an extremist. He was even one of the 18 members of the U.S. House to vote against a resolution condemning conspiracy theory QAnon leveled
Right.
by the FBI as a hate group. So he's too extreme, and we've got to beat him. And I'll be someone that is pragmatic. I will work with anybody that it takes to get things done to help our district, our state, and our country. And I will work as hard as humanly possible to make that happen.
And we're at the end. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you to all of our watchers and listeners. Just so you know, this video will be available on our YouTube page, which is just Dauphin County Democratic Committee. And you can also watch it again on our Facebook page at Dauphin County Democratic Committee. But I'd like to leave you with the closing and let people know why, if they haven't already voted, why they should vote for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Eugene DePasquale, Pennsylvania Auditor General, running for Congress. And people that have seen me over the last 8 years as your fiscal watchdog, being tough and fair on a Republican governor and tough and fair on a Democratic governor, finding over $1 billion wasted by Harrisburg, even in some instances stopping property tax increases. Following my investigation, we found 3,200 untested rape kits, and through my leadership, reducing that backlog by 97%, bringing some semblance of justice to the victims, finding 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the child abuse hotline, and working with both parties across the state and with child protection workers across the state to make sure our children are better protected. Doing the first ever audit of clean water programs in the state to make sure our drinking water was better protected with all the Marcellus shale drilling, and even doing an audit of climate change to make sure that we were pointing out how much these severe storms are impacting our state, and doing an audit of our nursing home industry to make sure our seniors get the protection they need. And even finally, the audit I had on the pharmacy benefit managers, the pharmaceutical drug industry in Pennsylvania, that led to bipartisan legislation that specifically lowered the cost of prescription drugs. That's the type of leadership I've provided over the last 8 years as Auditor General, and that's the type of leadership you'll get in Washington if I'm your member of Congress.
Thank you very much. And everyone have a great evening. To learn more about our Democratic candidates, you can go to our website, dauphindems.com.